And I think you're on mute.
Hi, everyone. There we go. Welcome to day 28 of Career Connect at Home. I'm Anna Gibson, and I'm here with Jennifer, Suveg, and Ali to talk about our company, Boston Consulting Group, or as most people call it, BCG. We'll share a little bit about why we like it and what we do, and then we would love to answer questions at the end of the session. So if you go to Career Connect at Home on their Instagram page, you can submit your questions there. We thought we would start with a little bit of an introduction and tell you what each of us does and how we got here. So why don't we start with Jennifer?
Hi, guys. My name is Jennifer Costin. I head up our program called PTO at BCG, and that does not stand for paid time off. For us, that stands for predictability, teaming, and open communication. And it is our program that we use with a number of coaches in the program that help our case teams work together more effectively. I am originally from Vancouver Island, so just a little bit north of here. That's where I grew up. And I studied international development during my undergrad degree, and I studied international affairs for my master's degree. And before BCG, I never intended to do consulting. I was actually in the Peace Corps in Rwanda and intended to work in public service and international development. But I found my way to BCG in 2013, and I started in the Johannesburg office as an associate, and I worked my way up for a few years. And then transferred over to our internal team, which I now work in. So that's a little bit about me. Anna, back to you.
Thank you. So I also didn't intend to join consulting when I was in high school or in college or after college. And in fact, I often tell people completely seriously that I don't know that I would have been fully able to explain what consulting was until about a month or two into the job itself. I actually, when I was little, wanted to be a teacher, and that was kind of the plan for me. So went to get degrees in math and in history, and then a master's in history, and then did exactly that, went to start teaching. And I taught for about 5 years. I'm getting to teach across all of the subjects, basically. And then finally realized it was probably time for something with a little bit more of a challenge to it. And so kind of stumbled into this company and this world of consulting, and it sounded really interesting. And so I wanted to take a shot at it. So I've been here for 3 years since then. And it has indeed provided the challenge that I wanted. So who knows if I will ever go back to teaching, but for now, I found that there was so much that I was able to really pull in from 5 years in education. A lot of that's actually been really transferable. So we can talk a little more about that in a bit. Subeg? Muted, my friend.
Classic. Hey, everyone. My name is Subeg. I am also a consultant at the Boston Consulting Group. I am originally from Nepal, and I sort of moved to the US when I was around 10. I was in Hawaii for about 8-ish years. And then I sort of left, my parents left, so we no longer live there. But I, since then, sort of went to college, got an undergrad degree in molecular biology. I liked it at the time. I spent a couple of years out of college doing some cancer research, like that as well. So then I went to do a PhD in developmental biology. And that was around when I thought, maybe I don't like it as much as I thought I did. And I wanted to get a sense for sort of what else is out there. And I'm definitely somebody who, well into my 20s, just had sort of one vision of what I wanted to do, and I followed through with it. And I stuck around in labs doing science for 10 plus years. And so after that, when I was trying to look for a different sort of challenge, something new to do, and something that's also sort of more broadly applicable to other things I was interested in, I was actually told about consulting by a friend, and I thought, oh, what is this about? And something that landed me at BCG, and something that I thought was really great, was they had some programs, we have some programs now that sort of specifically reach out to people with sort of what we call, non-traditional backgrounds, right? People who don't go to business school or necessarily have an interest in business or consulting from the start. So that's what landed me here. And I've since been working on sort of a lot of different types of projects, not just science, but I am really, really enjoying it and sort of happy to talk about it more.
And Allie.
Hi, my name is Tess. I am from Tacoma, Washington. I am an admin assistant here at BCG. I worked for BCG for about 2.5 years. Before that, I was working in the restaurant industry. And before that, I went to community college, actually. I did not get a 4-year degree. When I first started at BCG, I was actually in a position called office services. And what that kind of was day-to-day office management. I did a lot of the meeting organization. I did a lot of ordering for catering supplies, office supplies, and any ask that came from the consulting team, I did. They asked some wild and crazy things, which I'm happy to get into a little bit later for just quick turnaround. I'm flying to Nigeria. I need 40 copies of this deck. Wild things I've had to do. And then on the flip side of that, I had a really fun time because then I was also in charge of doing all staff events. So about once a month, once every other month, we throw just get-togethers for the staff, sometimes happy hours, sometimes lunches, and I got to cater the whole thing, and that was so much fun. Lots of themed things, just because it's so much more fun to do like a Friends theme or a Disney theme, things like that. But right now, I'm an admin assistant. I am currently supporting 6 people, 4 partners, 2 principals, 3 partners, 2 principals, and an associate director, which I can go into detail about later. But basically, I make sure their calendars are up to date, not conflicted. I talk to their client admins, making sure we land meetings. I do their travel for whenever that starts up again, and then I help them with expenses as well.
So as you can see, we've got a really good sample here of a lot of the different jobs at our company. But all of us, our job is to support just this fundamental concept of consulting. So what is consulting? I can tell you after 3 years now, I actually have an answer to that. So that's great. But it's nice and vague because at its core, consultants are really just problem solvers. Back when we started, back in I think the 1950s, the job of a consultant was to help a company decide where it wanted to go over the next 5 to 10 years, which we would call a strategy case. What's your vision? Who do you want to be and how can you get there? But since then, the world is much more complex and the problems we're solving are much more complex. And so we've moved past just doing those types of cases to really helping our clients do anything. So maybe that's that they want to merge with another company or acquire another company. We help them think through what that actually means and what that would look like. We help them brainstorm how to cut costs, or we help them with their marketing, or we help them make their supply chains more efficient, and 1,000 other problems across hundreds of industries in hundreds of countries. And it's a fascinating world because it requires you to be both creative, so using your right brain, and analytical, using your left brain. What's meaning we have to both be really good at doing the math and running the numbers and knowing how to run all the financial models, but we also have to be able to tell really compelling stories, and we have to be convincing. And so it's one of the best parts, I think, of this world that we're in, that you have to kind of be able to use your whole brain. And at the end of the day, what consulting really is about these relationships with our clients. We're assigned these clients and we spend a lot of time with them, oftentimes in person, maybe not always in the era of quarantine. And so it's my job really at the end of the day to help my client with whatever it will take to help him or her succeed. So you're going to hear in a bit about what a day looks like in the life of a consultant. And what you might notice is that probably all of our stories are going to sound really, really different, because if there's one thing that's true of our experiences, it's that there is no single one day or 1 week that looks the same as anybody else's. But what is consistent about our job is the way we do our work. So we work on case teams, which means with a very set, sometimes very small number of people, and we're assigned one client who we serve consistently over the course of sometimes a few weeks, all the way up to many months, and sometimes even a couple of years. And most of the time, we spend it on the client site with them in person, which means that we spend a lot of our time traveling. We go down to the client site every Monday, and we come back to our home offices and our home cities on Thursdays. And in the meantime, we live in hotels, and we just spend as much time as possible with the clients. And then Fridays, we are in our home offices here with our community, getting to kind of build those relationships here. It's a little different, obviously, right now with the virtual world that we're all living in, but that's kind of how it normally goes from day to day. But that's about as consistent as it gets. And everything else about it is varied. We have to be flexible, and things change all the time. So I want to give you guys an opportunity to hear how a day might look like for each of the four of us here. So you get a kind of a glimpse of what those changes could look like. So should we start with Jen?
Sure. Sorry. So my day. So I have my sort of team is an internal team. So when we think about how we're organized at BCG, we have what we call the consulting team side, and they're the ones who are working directly with our clients and are flying or traveling to the client site usually Monday to Thursday. And then we have our business services team. And our business services team, we're the sort of back end. We help the operations of the firm run. So that includes things like HR, it includes finance, it includes all of our internal operations. And that's the team that Ali and I are both part of. So we're the BST side, and Anna and Suveg are part of the CT side. So life in a BST role, which is one of the ones that I have, looks a little bit more stable. So in a given day, in a given week, I usually spend about 50% of my time in meetings. I have a team of 28 people who are working with our case team, so who are supporting those who are sort of on the front lines working with our clients. So most of my days are sort of 50% on calls, problem solving with my team, answering questions, working on strategic projects. And then 50% of my time is spent working on various things. It can be thinking through what the strategy of our program looks like. It can be thinking through how are we helping our teams in my function adjust to new ways of working. So right now, that's obviously the question of going totally remote. But that's typically how my days look. I'm here in the Seattle office with everybody here, but I work mainly from home, even in non-COVID times. I've given my stand-up desk and my fancy office to my husband, so now I just have the dining room table, but sharing is caring. But for me, typically I work from home because my team is spread out across North America and Canada and Mexico. And so I'm used to being on calls and on Zoom and on WebEx and all of those different things. So that gives me a little bit more flexibility in my day. So that's me.
Suveg?
Yeah, so, very sort of similar to what Anna said, I being part of the sort of consulting side, it basically depends on the case that I'm on, sort of what my schedule and my travel patterns are. And, for context, a case would, I would say, would run anywhere between probably around 4 weeks to, a couple of months is a normal sort of bracket. And so within that time frame, you're expecting to have a pretty consistent set of schedules and people you're working with and teammates and such. So, again, before we were all sort of working from home, my, let's say Monday would look like I would make sure that I'd want to take a flight to the client site, which would take about 1 to 1.5 hours. And we want to land there around noon. So sort of working back from that, I starting at around generously sort of 7:30, 8, making sure I'm making my way to the airport, et cetera. And then truthfully, we want to make sure we hit the ground running. So while I'm on the plane, I'm probably doing a little bit of work. I'm probably just making sure everything is sort of in line in terms of schedules, in terms of our agendas for the upcoming week. We'll meet up on the client site with our team. Our team usually consists of a small to medium-sized, group of people, and they'll come from different cities as well. So it's always kind of nice, to meet people in a consistent basis that are coming from all different places. At BCG, we tend to travel pretty regionally. So you'll find people that are sort of centered on the West Coast that are staffed in teams together. And we'll first sort of land, maybe take a quick lunch, discuss, catch up on everyone's weeks, really sort of think about how we're doing. And then once we get to work, it'll usually be on the client site. then it'll depend on a week by week basis what we're trying to achieve. And it's usually the case that we are sort of driving towards a short-term goal, right? So it'll be the case that, hey, this Thursday we have a really big meeting, and so let's figure out what we want to do there, and let's work backwards in terms of what we need to make sure that output exists. And in a way that to me feels sort of like the kind of things we used to do when we were in school, right? That if you know clearly there's an exam, you're scheduling out your study patterns and you're scheduling out your readings and all of those things, and it's not too different, but in this case it's not so much an exam as it is a meeting or some kind of output, and then the rest of the week just sort of proceeds based on that plan. And like Anna mentioned, often when we're traveling we stay at hotels, and so we'll sort of work until around sort of early evening, middle evening, and we'll generally sort of relocate to hotels, take some time for ourselves, go to the gym, get some dinner, etc. And then sometimes if you're working a little bit longer, you'll finish out the day in your hotel by yourself, and then the next morning you're sort of starting anew with your team, and just doing that for a couple of days. And so usually, like you said, Monday to Thursday, that's the cadence. And then Fridays tend to be a little bit sort of more chill, more relaxed. And that's by design. It's to help us sort of get to know our cohort in our local office. It's also to make sure we're catching up on, work-related things that are important to us, right? So if there are sort of things going on at work that relate to any of the things, sort of shared interest, diversity and inclusion, things of that nature, that's all sort of captured on that Friday where everyone in your office is together. And that's another sort of consistent group of people that you get to affiliate with, be friends with, and sort of build some relationships and some plans with. And so, yeah, that's just sort of how it goes. And it goes sort of week over week, month over month. And, next thing you know, you've done a couple of cases and it's getting to be a year, right? So things move pretty quickly, but there are very sort of predictable patterns in the job, I would say.
Love it. Allie, do you want to go and then I'll wrap us up for this part?
Yeah, so like Jen said, I am a part of the business services team, which means that I have a much more structured day. I give kudos to the consulting staff who have to work and fly and do everything so much faster, and they don't have that structure. I work 7:30 a.m. to 4 p.m. I'm off at 4 p.m. It is very encouraged for me to be off. So I like knowing that, listen, you need these things. You've got until this time and kind of kick them off. But 7:30 until about 11:30, I'm usually pretty heavy. Just in my inbox, I get requests from we call them customers, the people that I support, the 6 different folks. They'll send me requests. I am working on just moving the calendar around between 12 and 2. Typically in normal BCG days, I would be probably working on travel. And then towards the end of the week, I would be working on expenses and making sure that all of the things that they have charged to their corporate cards are taken care of. But my day usually consists of sitting behind my laptop and working on emails and calendars.
Love it. And then I guess I'll wrap up for us. So like I mentioned earlier, one of the things I really love about this job is that I get a chance to exercise both parts of my brain. So if I think about a normal day, which we don't really have a ton of normal days, but a normal day could mean I could start with one of our clients in the morning. We'd sit down together in their office and we would ask a question. So something like, why is it that my competitor can sell their product at a higher price than we can sell ours? That doesn't make sense to me. And we'll sit there and we'll brainstorm different reasons why that might be the case. And we come up with a little list. And by the end of the meeting, then I take the list and I start going and doing research. And I look all around. I look on the internet, I look on our internal sites, and I try and find some answers to these hypothetical questions. And I go back to the client then a little later in the day and I say, do any of these look right to you? Do some of these feel like you see this happening at your company? And they'll often say yes to the 1, 2, and 4. So then I'll take 1, 2, and 4 and I'll go find data to support those things. And I'll run models or I'll build something in Excel that helps me kind of calculate, if our hypotheses that we thought were true. And then I have to put those onto slides. So I transfer from this very logical kind of mathematical approach to something that feels much more artistic. How do I present this data in a way that it makes sense to our eyes and is beautiful on a page and tells some sort of a story really well? And then that I take to our team. And I say, team, test this for me. Do these hypotheses and these answers that I found, do they seem to make sense? And so everybody in the team sits around a table. They all look at these pages that I've created, the math that I've done, and they all help me by giving me critiques. And they suggest things, and they pressure test it, and we can see if we can find some holes in my logic. And then I take what we then created together, and I fix the holes, and I polish up the math, and then that goes back to the client, and we say, we think we found a couple places where you can maybe increase your price or whatever it may be. But I love that, because over the course of a day, you're being creative, you're brainstorming, it's very collaborative with our team. There's also times when it's just me thinking hard in front of my computer. There's research involved. And so over the course of one day, you really have used this massive set of skills. And then one of the things that I love that Suveg brought up is that because a lot of us are on the road together, you're with your team at the site with the client, and then you're with your team in these hotels at night. And so a lot of times these teammates become my very dearest friends. And a lot of times we'll end up going to dinner together, and then we'll end up working in a hotel room together, and you're just with each other all day, every day, in this very collaborative setting where those people are my friends. They're also my best brainstorming partners. They make me better at my job because they help me think of other options or opportunities. And so it's this really cool fusion of kind of work and life when we're on the road, especially. And then, of course, Fridays feel a little different for us because that's more like a traditional office setting. But so for a day in the life of me, it's on the, like when I think of a day in the life of consultants, that's probably what it looks like. So that gives you an idea of some of what we do, but we wanted to also give you a chance to talk about what it is that we love about the job. And so maybe we could start reverse this time, and with Allie, and if you could talk about what it is that makes you want to show up in the mornings.
Yeah, I think starting in the office services role really kind of drives me in my admin role. I got to do the more macro level. Consultants come home, is what I always refer to it as, come home to the office on Fridays, and I basically throw them a party every week, or I spoil them with breakfast or lunch or some fun activity. They work really hard lives, as you've kind of heard. They are constantly traveling. And I think that knowing that that's kind of how they operate, it made making their day on Fridays a lot more fun. So now flip that to the admin role. I don't get to do that for the whole office anymore, but I really, I just saw a question pop through. I'm so sorry, it distracted me. Now I get to do that on a much more granular level for 6 people. And I support some very awesome people. They have just really great attitudes. They love that I am able to do the things that I can do. To answer the question, I'm given 8 hours a day, and I somehow have to cram in 14 hours worth of work in 8 hours a day, but also remind these consultants and these higher level execs that I support that like lunch is important, and taking a break and going outside for a walk is important. The people that I work with on the consulting track, they are so driven by their work that they do for our clients that they kind of forget to take care of themselves. So my role in that is to help remind them, like, you need to take time for yourself, and you need to kind of like take a step back, like go make something that's not in the microwave, or don't order off caviar today. Like, spoil yourself by making something from scratch, maybe. So that's what keeps me going, knowing that the drive for my consultant team that I support to support their clients, I turn around and support them just as much as I can.
Yeah, I think I can go next. So, when I think about what I really enjoy and what I love, I think of it in 2 different ways. So I think the first part can be sort of what I like about the job of consulting itself. And then the second part, I think about what I like about Boston Consulting Group where I work, right? So the job itself is really interesting because by its nature, people ask you to solve problems that are unusual and they're difficult. And the thing is, if you can imagine any company, if there was a problem that came up over and over and over again, they would have, people within the company to solve that problem, right? And if they needed it, they would hire somebody else to do this kind of work. Now, what you need sort of external consultants for is if something unusual, like COVID, right? Like COVID is a great example of that's not something anybody predicted, but it came up. And there's a lot of reactions that have to happen, right? And that's an example of something where companies say, hey, look, we don't really know, right? There's so much uncertainty around this. And can we get your help in figuring this out together? Here are some of the things that we have and we're thinking about, but what have you seen and what are you thinking about, right? And we get to do that very, very regularly. And so like the level of work that we do is really, really high. It's pretty intense, but it feels really important. The sort of output that we give to the clients end up making a fairly big difference in the way they think about their businesses and their futures. And the team that you work with, there's this common understanding that, we're people working really hard to solve a really difficult problem. And I think there's sort of this common enemy vibe of just like, you're trying to fix something that's really, really hard to find an answer to. And that really brings people together. And I love that. So that's the consulting side of this. Now, when it comes to BCG specifically, I love the incredible amount of support we have. And as Ali mentioned, right, there are people on the business services team who are really incredibly dedicated to making sure that we sort of understand how to do our job well, that we are well equipped to do our job well. And that goes across all of these different functions. And there are definitely, ways in which companies think about providing for their employees and their workers, benefits or sort of availabilities that allow them to be not just their best sort of working selves, but their best personal selves as well. And I think BCG, in my experience, has done a really good job of that. And that's something that also really, really helps me do the rest of my job and enjoy the rest of my work and sort of enjoy being with the people around me, So I think those are sort of the two big things.
Jen?
I think for me, there's two things. I think one is the people. I've been at BCG now for 7.5 years, and I've been both part of the South Africa, Johannesburg office and part of the Seattle office here, and executed projects in both Zimbabwe and Canada and the US and South Africa. And in that, I've gotten to know people who work for our firm all over the world. And I've just been incredibly inspired and motivated at just how amazing the people are. They're people who I truly call friends that I've created amazing connections with, who are also really passionate about their work and are incredibly smart. So I think the people were part of why I came to BCG, and it's definitely the reason now why I stay. And I think the second thing is, you probably heard from all of us, like even though we work internally and client facing, that I think there's this real culture of empowered leadership and decision making, which means that whether you sit internally, whether you sit in client facing work, whether you're senior, whether you're junior, there's really this culture that permeates across where people are empowered to make decisions and drive action. And that's just really rewarding to feel like you can wake up every morning, and whether it's something like planning a meal for the entire office like Ali has done for us so many times, or whether it's making a recommendation to a CEO, or whether it's working with your team member to make a choice about the direction of something, you really feel that you can make those decisions and drive action, which feels incredibly rewarding. So those are the two things I love. Anna?
Love that. Well, I know we have just a couple minutes left. So, and actually the things that I would have said are exactly what you heard. The challenges we get to solve and the people we get to solve them with. I've just never been in a place quite like this before. I do want to leave a couple extra minutes for questions. And I see we've got a couple here in the chat, so I might just take us straight into that. There's a couple questions that are coming up around what do you do in high school to prepare for a job like this, and what do you do in college? Are there activities that you should have on your resume in high school? Do you need to have a certain degree, et cetera, in college? And I actually think that one of the beautiful things about my experience so far here, and the reason I'm at this company, is there is definitely no one linear track to getting to our company. everybody that you see on this screen had a different plan in mind when they first were in high school and college before ending up here. And it's actually one of the things that I think makes us good at solving problems. If they get people who are all across the spectrum of their interests and of the academics that they have taken, the degrees they come in with, the broader the spectrum, the better we are at problem solving. So that means I've sat on teams with people who have PhDs in Russian literature and who have come out of Teach for America and who have done just a broad spectrum of things that have nothing to do with consulting on their surface. But what we all realize is what connects us is we are curious and we enjoy brainstorming and problem solving. And so I would say when I have done these talks before, when I chat with high schoolers or college students who ask what they can do to get here, how are you developing your sense of curiosity? How are you developing your ability to problem solve? It doesn't have to be in a subject or a particular type of problem. Like all of us here can't ever prepare for the case that we show up to on day one. That's when you start preparing for that particular case. We just do the most interesting and varied things. But what we all would say is we are very good at asking good questions and then chasing down the answers. So whatever path it is that interests you, whatever field of study you want to be in, pursue it. And don't feel like that eliminates your chance of working for a company like ours or doing consulting work. Rather, ask yourself, how can I be better at asking questions and how can I be better at figuring out creative answers? So that would be my answer to that.
Can I add two things to that? I was just going to say, so for me, the way that I felt like I learned that, and when I think about what skills have been most transferable, and I would argue that this is, for me, would be the skills that I would think have helped me in my career at BCG, but if I were ever to leave BCG, I think would be helpful. I think the two that come to mind are, one, being able to present to a group, to be able to express your thoughts to your team in a way that is constructive and collaborative. And for me in high school, that came through debate. In my life post-undergrad, that came through teaching in Rwanda, and I know Anna has taught as well. But there's nothing like learning how to speak in front of an audience than having 60 high schooler students to sit in front of. And there's even more in this group, but I learned by trial and error and how to do that. So one is just learning how to develop your own presence, which I think is something you can do over time. And then second, building on what Anna said, being able to articulate the way you're thinking about a problem. And for me, the way that I learned that really came through in undergrad. Like I said, I studied international development and political science. And so I spent a lot of time during my undergrad degree researching and writing essays and learning how to lay out an argument and structure a thought and come to a conclusion and a recommendation. I have found that has been incredibly valuable, both when I was on the consulting team side and working with clients, and now that I'm working internally, still incredibly valuable. And I think you can get that through that ability to problem solve, to lay out an argument, to write out a sort of narrative. I think you can get from all different sorts of types of study.
Yeah, if I could add something really quickly, I completely sort of agree with everything that's been said. And I think it's such good advice, right? I think the one thing I will say that I have found very almost unexpectedly true about this job is how much it involves small sort of one-on-one or small group interactions and how much you interact with people. A lot of business and consulting can seem very, distant and really abstract, but I would say in short, just find things you like and then think about why you like them, right? Think about what makes a really good book good, what makes a good podcast interesting, and maybe think about dissecting the process of what really pulls you in and keeps you hooked onto things. I think that's a really good approach. And that can be across any of the things that interest you. But if you start thinking about why, it'll really help you build up the idea of how you can also communicate to people in a way that resonates with them. And I think that's been the part of the job that's generally more applicable than necessarily taking a specific class or doing an activity.
I think there was a question about travel and about how many offices we have in our global footprint. I think the one on our number of offices and global footprint, I think if we source the collective wisdom on this call, I think we're about 90 offices in 50 countries, if that feels right. But then our footprint in terms of the clients we serve is even greater than that. And so we may, for instance, if I think about our work that we've done in Africa, when I was in Johannesburg, for instance, we would still be covering clients in Angola, in Mozambique, in Kenya, for instance, even though at the time we didn't necessarily have offices there. And there's a big opportunity to travel. There's opportunities to travel within BCG, both as part of your case teams. So if you're based in Seattle, you might be staffed on a client that's in San Francisco, for instance, or that's in New York. So you might have that sort of localized travel. And then there's opportunities to be staffed on more international cases. So for myself, when I moved to Seattle, they were looking for someone who had expertise doing field studies in Africa, which is something that I had done. And so I went to Zimbabwe for 5 months to work on a project there with one of our nonprofit partners, which is something we dedicate a lot of resources to within BCG, partnering and bringing the same sort of problem solving and strategic vision to some of our nonprofit partners. So there's lots of opportunities to travel. And then there's more structured sort of travel opportunities. So you guys probably heard me say I started in South Africa. So that was where I started. But after about 2.5 years, I decided that I wanted to be a little closer to Canada, and going from Vancouver Island to Johannesburg is probably like the longest travel distance in the world. So that was why in 2015, I moved to Seattle as part of a formal transfer process. And you'll see a lot of folks, Suveg just transferred from San Francisco to Seattle. You'll see a lot of people within BCG move around, whether because they want to travel or something in their life dictates that they need to move. And then we also have programs like one we called Ambassador Abroad, for instance, and that gives people the opportunity where, let's say you're an associate, for instance, who's had a few years under their belt in Seattle, but you really want to see Switzerland. And so you may apply for a temporary transfer to the Zurich office, for instance, and go work there for a year, execute cases there, and then come back. So there's definitely, travel feels like part of our DNA at BCG. Not right now. Doesn't feel like anybody's DNA, but in general, there's great opportunity to travel.
I did want to add, even though as BST, we technically have our own desks in the office, especially in Seattle, some really cool opportunities that have come up for some folks on my team. One of the admins that I work with was on an ambassadorship to Iceland, and she was able to go and work in our Iceland office as an admin still with PT hours, Pacific time hours, and was still had the opportunity because there was an office there. So she was able to log in and do the work and then spend the rest of her day traveling. So it's not just for the consulting staff. There is opportunities if an admin is traveling, they're totally allowed to bring their laptop and continue working.
Can I answer the question, why should someone think about being a consultant for a job? Okay. I think there's a couple great things about thinking about being a consultant. I think one is, we've talked a lot about the fact that one of the things that really makes consulting unique is that it's really dynamic. You change teams, you may change the clients that you're working for, you may change the industries you're working for, and over time you develop an expertise. But it really gives you an opportunity to see all different sorts of areas of the private sector and the public sector. And for me, coming in, having worked sort of exclusively in international development, exclusively with nonprofit organizations, it was sort of a wonderful learning opportunity and exposure. I think the second thing is, because of the pace of which we work and the type of problems we're working on, it's sort of like this, it's almost like a master class in learning how to problem solve and learning how to articulate a challenge, articulate a narrative, do some complex analytics. Like, building stuff that I was never particularly good in, as Anna knows, having worked with me, but being able to do, you know, analytics and finding the answer to problems, it's kind of like a masterclass or a boot camp in that, where I think about my first year at BCG when I was, you know, 27. I probably learned more in my first year at BCG than I think I learned in my 4 years of undergrad. It was just like this master class of learning, and it was just wonderful and exhilarating.
Yeah, I might jump in on the back of that. Actually, the way I often tell it to people is that BCG often feels like a boot camp, especially the first year, where you are learning hard skills like how to do an Excel model, and you're learning soft skills, how do you present to a room of clients. And I say that because it means sometimes it's really, really hard work, especially as you're learning in the first 6 months to a year. It's really hard. The pace is really fast. We work on truly challenging problems that are sometimes really hard to solve. But a lot of times what you'll hear people say who are at our company right now is they are here to learn those skills, and they don't plan to stay here for their entire life. They want to come and soak up what they can learn while they're here, and then take that somewhere else and use those skills. So for some people, they don't love the idea of bouncing around from different client to different client, or even different industry after different industry for years over years over years. But they see value in doing maybe 2 or 3 years here and really getting to see what exists out there in terms of different companies or different positions at those companies, learning that skill set, and then taking that and picking a company to land on. And so I think there is value in being here long term. There's amazing abilities and opportunities as you stay here year after year. But there's also a huge benefit in seeing this as maybe just a couple years where you come and you soak and you learn and you do. And it's hard, but you end up being better to serve maybe a different company as you leave. So I think that's just one other perspective on this place that you would hear a lot of our peers say. Anything else, Subeg or Ali?
No, I think that sounds completely right to me.
Okay. Well, I think that was our last question. So I might actually wrap us up then here. Thanks so much for joining us today. It was really wonderful to get to share what we do and why we love it. And you can come back here tomorrow for the last Career Connect at Home session of the school year. I think it's with Puget Sound Energy, and you'll get to learn about how they power the Puget Sound area. So thanks for your time today.